Hello, this video was inspired by Nikos Sotirakopoulos, a similarly themed video about his journey from being a hard-left communist and an anti-Semite into being a capitalist and a Zionist. Well, I could say I had a similar journey, and I have to admit that the similarities between Nikos's journey and mine are very close indeed, although my journey was from the hard right, I should say. I call it neopagan nationalism. It is a kind of far-right, quasi-mystical ideology deeply rooted in anti-Christian sentiments and the desire to return to pagan beliefs of the European peoples, which obviously also immediately connects to concepts like blood and soil. It is a vicious ideology, irrational, anti-liberal, anti-individual, anti-capitalist, and is a part, at least a significant part, of the modern dissident right. So I first became aware of such things like neopaganism and the need to return to heathenry, pagan beliefs, when I was a teenager and I started listening to metal music, which was very interesting. I got interested in all the mythologies of the European peoples, the Norse mythology, the Slavic mythology, while listening to black metal and pagan metal bands and heavy metal bands. Well, and as I delved deeper into this, in the history of the European peoples and the pagan beliefs, I very quickly got involved in discussion groups on the IRC, on the Polish IRC groups involving neopagan stuff connected with black metal music. And now that I think of it, it was always very much interconnected with far-right politics. There are indeed neo-pagan groups which can be considered far-left, but mostly it is always usually connected with far-right political ideology involving concepts like blood and soil and, the resistance against the Jewish machinations of some Jewish cabal globalists. Now they are called globalists, but back then, almost 30 years ago, the word globalist wasn't used as much. It was mostly, Jewish finances was a scare word and stuff like this. Bilderberg groups, stuff like that. So anyway, so my first interest was, to be rebellious against dominant Christian faith in Poland, against Catholicism, because back then when I was a teenager, it quickly became apparent that there's something wrong with Christianity. First of all, it is completely irrational, but it's also, maybe this is the key, Christianity was considered a foreign ideology, a foreign sort of invasion, ideological invasion from, Middle East, foreign and alien to the spirituality of European peoples. So somehow Christianity has had to go. We had to get rid of Christianity, but you see, here's the pattern. Not because it was through and through irrational, faith-based ideology or just a religion. So in a rational modern society, there should be no place for religion, or at least in a significant form, in a significant way. No, for neo-pagans, it wasn't the problem with the religion per se, but with this religion, Christianity, being in fact Jewish. It was in fact Jewish. So it was alien to the soul of European peoples, to the blood of European peoples. So this was the problem with Christianity for most of neo-pagans. But I may consider myself lucky because I very early came into contact with a neopagan philosophy created by a Polish thinker, Jan Stachniuk. And Jan Stachniuk was a genius. He was not concerned with resurrecting pagan faith. He was not concerned with sort of religious rituals. He was only interested in discovering what drives people to culture, to making culture. He was first and foremost, he was interested in the causes of the decline of Poland and Polish nation. He concluded that it was Catholicism, especially starting in 17th century with Counter-Reformation, which devastated Polish spirituality, Polish way of thinking. And he was interested in reversing this trend from degeneracy, from spiritual misery into something heroic. Heroic is the key. And he concluded that reintroducing elements of paganism in some sort of modern context would perhaps invigorate Polish society to do heroic things and to become a civilized nation once again. So I think that early influence of Jan Stachniuk was in fact a positive thing for me, because I never got involved with any kind of Catholic far right, because I knew that Catholicism was bad as it is. All those, extreme conservatists, extreme far right sort of ideas of Catholic integrism, national conservatism, all this stuff which MAGA is today about, these were out of the window, because these were not progressive movements, in fact. So thanks to Stachniuk, I was not a conservative. I considered myself a neopagan, but I was kind of, progressive, in meaning that I wanted my surroundings, my society to progress, not regress into, I don't know, Perun worship in thatched hats, as many neo-pagans actually would love to see civilization regress, to actually see civilization be destroyed and return to primitive, to quote Ayn Rand. So around 2001, when I became a university student, I was, having all these ideas in my head. Politically, I was inclined towards, far-right ideas, that is nationalism, but without Catholic God. So there was no political option for me. Actually, I didn't have any rational underpinnings to explain my nationalism. I only wanted, the return of the glory of the Slavic people, the lost glory which was supposed to be ours but was taken from us by Christians and Germans and Jews and whatnot. And well, to achieve that, we had to return to our pagan roots and, glory to the nation. So there was no actual substance, no rational desires, only this kind of collectivist, tribalist mysticism. So I began reading more of Stachniuk, and well, I discovered that he was kind of collectivist economically. He wanted planned economy, and I started studying economics at my studies at university. But as I learned more and more economics, I learned that collectivism was not such a good idea, that actually markets are much better. Markets are much better, however you look at it, because, at Polish universities back then, we had a mixture of, microeconomics, neoclassical economics, and then macroeconomics, that is Keynesianism and monetarism. So basically this kind of mainstream mixture of neoclassical micro and Keynesianism and monetarism. But Combining it with other economic subjects, other economic courses we had, I developed appreciation for markets. So I began doubting in any kind of economic dictatorship, sort of, as it was mostly favored by neopagans, because neopagans are mostly Nazis. They are Nazis. They are national socialists. They want to have, the national sort of unity, national community, that is collectivizing almost all industry, all agriculture. It has to be, controlled by the nation, by the folk, by the national community. Otherwise, evil speculators, Jews and whatnot, would take advantage of poor Aryan folk or something like that. So I quickly realized that people who subscribe to this neo-pagan worldview are completely ignorant of economics, or they have simply views which can be considered communist or national socialist, but there's really very little difference. So here I realized that those people are anti-rational. And as I was reading Jan Stachniuk, anti-rationality and simply stupid attitudes towards real life are elements of Catholic regression. Usually, people like Catholics who are not really concerned with real life, they escape into stupid concepts and lose the competition with better societies on earth. That's why Poland fell. Poland fell in 18th century precisely because Catholicism made its political class stupid and completely incapable of dealing with real world. And I saw similar trends among the neo-pagans, that they completely rejected, for instance, economics. They considered proper economics, which obviously proper economics has appreciation for markets, for market exchange, price formation, things like that. Neo-pagans rejected economics as Jewish science almost. They almost called economics Jewish science, just as Marxists would reject economics as bourgeois science. So it became quite apparent around 2003 that most neo-pagans are simply dumb people who can only repeat that Jews control everything and, we need to nationalize everything into our national community so that we may take control over our destiny. These are the typical slogans used by neo-pagans, but also by far-right dissidents today. You can easily find similarities between such slogans uttered by neo-Nazis 25 years ago and MAGA people today. So, as I was increasing my knowledge of economics, I learned that, for instance, interest is not Jewish, but is actually a price of future money. That you cannot actually have an economy without interest, without usury. No highly functioning economy can function without credit, that is properly priced rate of interest. Modern economies cannot function without markets and price formation because becomes the economic calculation problem. So as you can see, it was around 2003 and 2004 when I first came across the names Ludwig von Mises and Marie Rothbard. This is how I discovered the Austrian school, and I immediately got so hooked on the writings of Rothbard and Mises that I immediately concluded that Jews are the best. Jews are the best thinkers. So immediately, if there was any remnants of anti-Semitism in me, it immediately evaporated. Although back in 2002, during my first year of economic studies, I was also fascinated by Milton Friedman. So I never took this neo-pagan anti-Semitism seriously, because I was much more interested in what a person has to say instead of what is the person's ethnic background. So I think that was a really positive thing about me, that I never got very much into checking people's ethnic backgrounds for validating what they say, instead focusing on what people actually say. Yeah. So around 2003 and 2004, I was already full-on free marketer. I could no longer accept any kind of statism, which would not happen if I had not come across the names Mises and Rothbard on a neo-pagan forum. It was a forum called scadi.net. And there I came across, for the first time, the Austrian School of Economics. Really strange place on the internet to find Austrian School of Economics, which is obviously called by many neo-Nazis and neo-pagans, is called a Jewish School of Economics, because most of its members, most of its contributors, like Ludwig von Mises, Mari Rothbard, Israel Kirzner, were all Jews. Yeah. So already in 2004, I thought that Jews are not the prime evil which we have to fight against. So Jews were all right by that time, but Christians were not, and I hope this won't ever change. But what about the actual neo-paganism? Well, as I explained before, thanks to being influenced by Jan Stachniuk, I wasn't really interested in neo-pagan rites and trying to bring back the whole Slavic religion. Although, what I was kind of more interested was something the Germans call Weltanschauung. The Weltanschauung. This is the worldview, the all-encompassing worldview. So is there such a thing as a neo-pagan worldview? And obviously, for some neo-pagans, it surely is. It is a worldview involving blood and soil. It is a worldview in which people are what their blood is. It is their ethnic background completely shapes what they are. It is a strikingly anti-individualistic worldview, anti-rational, because it completely takes your free will out of the picture. You cannot become someone, something else than your blood, your ethnic background dictates, or your soil, that is the place where you were born, dictates. So, as you can see, the neo-pagan worldview is completely at odds with modern world. It is. Because modern world is a world based on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. This is something which brought our civilization in Europe to what it is. The Western civilization. Enlightenment brought us to this place. The place of modern civilization, where individuals are free, individuals have dignity, they have liberty, they have right to life, they can pursue their own happiness, and everything else follows. Industry, factories, markets, consumer goods, modern technology, modern housing, high-tech internet, everything else. This is all the result of enlightenment. Nothing else. It is not a result of Christianity. It is not a result of the superiority of our European blood or something like that. It is simply the result of man discovering reason, of man discovering that each and every individual is capable of thinking with his own mind. In neopagan worldview, there is no place for an individual. There's only tribe, bound by blood and bound by soil. A single individual is only worth what he contributes to the tribe. He doesn't live for himself. He lives for the tribe. This is the implicit presupposition in neopagan worldview. They may say that, we cherish individual achievement or something like that, but in fact they don't. So in political realm, neopagans are very collectivistic and authoritarian, because there can't be anything else. Well, you may find an odd one, a neopagan libertarian, for instance, or some, I don't know, a Wicca left liberal or something like this. But in essence, they are bound by their collective thinking. In their minds, individuals are but tools or means to an end, and for a neopagan, the end is glorious national community bound by blood. So this is the reason why, if you come across neopagans or any kind of dissident far-right winger in these dark times, they will always be full of conspiracy theories and some kind of twisted, irrational thinking on topics like the Jews or the Israel, or global financiers. So they cannot accept the validity of economics. For them, economics is, as I said, is either Jewish science or globalist science or bourgeois science. So they do not believe in science, actually. So they reject science as it is. They reject the validity of human mind, that a human mind can't actually discover logical ways in which the world works, the logical ways in which humans act. So neopagans, despite sometimes thinking of themselves as humanist, they scorn individuals. They scorn individuality, and they only feel at ease within the context of a tribe. So what I was most concerned when I was still considering myself a neopagan was the lack of beauty and sort of epic, glorious feeling in people's lives. Yeah, sounds funny, but perhaps this is why I became a musician. I started playing heavy metal music around the year 2000 to instill this feeling of power, glory, and this kind of epic elucidation through the power of music. So I think that the neopagan worldview had the biggest impact on my aesthetics, I could say. That's how I would frame it. So, because I rejected all kind of collectivism in economics. Then, when it came to politics, I became inspired by a guy called Janusz Korwin-Mikke, who was firmly against democracy. He was kind of a, aristocrat. So this kind of aristocratic approach to politics allured to me, and in the same way, I was concerned with aesthetics as a thing to be sort of elitist, and when it came to music, to playing music, to be a vessel for this, exactly, a neo-pagan vision of the world. So neopaganism kind of stayed with me for longest in aesthetics, and maybe to some extent with this kind of disdain for mass democracy. But I don't know, maybe most neopagans are for mass democracy, but with authoritarian streak. So around 2006, I was inspired in politics by Janusz Korwin-Mikke, but around 2006 I came across the book Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, a German, supposedly libertarian philosopher who resided in the United States and was a disciple of Murray Rothbard. And this book, it really made an impression on me because it kind of combined the notion of unfettered freedom in economics with this aristocratic view of politics. So perhaps, I could say this was the next stage of my development, and I can now say for sure that it wasn't a good stage, because Hans Hermann Hoppe sometimes is considered a theoretician of anarcho-capitalism, just as Rothbard was, but his vision of a stateless society is based on this aristocratic notion that when a society finally gets rid of, the state, the democratic state, the oppressive democratic state, it will produce natural elites which would govern it through voluntary means, obviously, because these are natural elites. So people, members of the stateless society, simply go to the most competent people who serve as judges and leaders, and that's how the society self-organizes itself. Well, and it kind of this kind of explanation really talked to me. I considered it a very interesting way of reforming society. Yeah, get rid of the state and replace all the institutions of even a liberal state with this kind of private property authoritarianism, because this is what it is. This is the main crux of Hoppian thought, that these natural elites would in fact produce natural fiefdoms, like feudal fiefdoms, in which they would have absolute power, and people would voluntarily subscribe to their power. Obviously, they would have maybe the opportunity to leave when they decide that the power of such a natural elite is too much, but there would be no institution except goodwill of others to secure their rights. Exactly. This is the main problem with Hoppe, that Hoppe never talks about rights, because he only considers one right to be sacrosanct: private property, the property rights in person and in stuff, in land. But in his philosophy, there are no rights to life and to liberty, because everything can be reduced to property rights. So I was really obsessed with this vision starting from 2006 to around 2011, maybe. I was really thinking like Hoppe. This is the way for the society to go, to move forward. Get rid of democracy, get rid of modern state institutions, and replace them with unfettered free market, but organized along the natural elites, with only the private property as the milepole. So it is interesting, because in politics, in day-to-day politics, I was a voter of Janusz Korwin-Mikke, this far-right politician in Poland, even though he was a Catholic supposedly and a monarchist. But deep in my heart, I was, this anarcho-capitalist, private property, private law society of Hans Hermann Hoppe. And still I consider myself a neopagan, especially aesthetically, because I thought that such a society based on the private law and domination of private law, everything is private, and natural elites, natural aristocracy rules everything. Such a society would rise to the heights never imagined and would actually be aesthetically superior to everything else, would really be that kind of progressive sort of, future society which even Jan Stachniuk would be proud of. But with passing time, doubt set in. Also, I discovered philosophy of Ayn Rand. Philosophy of Ayn Rand was much more appealing to me than the writings of Hoppe even, because it touched on this aesthetic thing, actually. This aesthetic thing, heroism. What lacked really in what Hoppe's ideology lacked was heroism. It was too mechanistic, too simplistic, maybe in some way too rationalistic, while the writings of Ayn Rand were very they talked to my feeling and sentiments of heroic aestheticism. I don't even know how to describe it. They really reinvigorated my sort of neopagan understanding of heroic aesthetics. I overcomplicated that, but this is why I found even the novel, The Fountainhead, especially appealing. This heroic individual who struggles. It sounds really neo-pagan. So after I read, first I watched the movie in 2007. I watched the movie The Fountainhead with Gary Cooper. A year later, I read The Fountainhead in English, and a few months later, I read Atlas Shrugged in English, and it was a really powerful discovery. So I really took a deep dive into Ayn Rand's philosophy, although I still wanted sort of to combine, Ayn Rand's aesthetics, focus on reason, on self-interest, on, rational egoism. It was a kind of new concept to me, but was very appealing, but still wanted to combine it with anarcho-capitalism as an economic and political system, which obviously was completely at odds with what Ayn Rand had written and what followers of Ayn Rand thought. But I think the greatest change in my thinking, thanks to this discovery of Ayn Rand, was the change in my stance on Israel. So, by discovering Rothbard or Hoppe, I still had no actual position on Israel, because, well, I could say I was a libertarian, a typical libertarian after I dropped all economic collectivism. So I was a political libertarian with aristocratic tendencies from 2004 onwards. But when it came to foreign policy, to stuff like the role of the United States, the role of the European Union, or the stance on Israel, I was obviously like a typical libertarian. I was against American interventionism, the support America gave to Israel. I completely did not feel that Israel had any legitimate right in the West Bank or something like that, although I never actually studied the matter. Although I remember in my university we had this course called International Political Relations and International Economic Relations, And there was some talk about Israel, but the guy and the professor who lectured on that topic was in fact very critical of Israel. So even on university, digesting this mainstream knowledge, we were taught that Israel is in the wrong. I remember all the news around it, because when I was in university, Second Intifada was in progress, and we were actually, if we follow the news, and I followed the news because I was told by my macroeconomics professor to always follow the news. So I started following the news closely from 2002 onwards, the mainstream news, the brainwashing TV news. And we were bombarded by news from Israel regarding Second Intifada. So we were seeing the atrocities of Hamas and Israeli military reaction to Hamas and Palestinian terrorism almost daily. And we were we were bombarded with the news, but we did not have the proper understanding of the conflict, of this whole matter, to have a proper opinion on it. So, for instance, when Israel finally managed to kill this Hamas leader, this old crippled Sheikh Ismail, or whatever was his name, this kind of old grandpa who was a spiritual leader of Hamas, I was kind of disgusted. I thought, whoa, those Jews, they are really cruel by killing this grandpa. But this grandpa was a fucking murderer. This grandpa was the architect of many terrorist attacks, which resulted in the slaughter of hundreds of Jews. So we as students back then, students of economics and international relations or whatever, we were not taught properly at the university to think properly about these matters. So, considering our professor was critical of Israel, but he wasn't, he wasn't a rabid communist or a leftist. He was just, this left of center liberal maybe, who was just critical that Israel dares to build a wall, to build a wall to protect itself from terrorist attacks. That it kind of reminded him of apartheid or something like that. So this kind of hatred or being distrustful of Israel was instilled in us, even at university during mainstream courses. And add to that this neopagan nationalism I got into around 2000, which was simply anti-Semitic, because you can't be a neopagan and not be distrustful of Jews, because Jews invented Christianity, to enslave Europeans. This was the trope. So, without thinking about it, I was very distrustful of Israel, even though there were instances where Israel really made an impression on me. For instance, back then it was the Prime Minister of Israel was Ariel Sharon, and I remember during every evening news, when there was any mention of Israel or Second Intifada, there was this clip of Ariel Sharon walking through a corridor, like this, this his dynamic walk through a corridor, and I remember seeing him and what an evil Jew. But there was something in his confidence that really made an impression on me, and thinking, hey, maybe he's a good leader of his people. So these were these two opposite feelings I felt when I watched news about Israel on TV. And there were other stuff, like I remember it was early 2005 when the Swedish band Sabaton, which I just discovered, released an album called Primo Victoria. And on this album, there were songs about various historical battles. like the war in Falklands, the war in Iraq, Second World War, something about that. And I remember there was a song called Counter-Strike, which was about the 6-Day War. And this song really made an impression on me. It really pictured Israel as this force of nature, this determined, outnumbered little country which said, we will defend and we will defeat you. So yeah, it was quite a striking song, which kind of made me like Israel more. But the real change came when I finally delved deep into Ayn Rand's philosophy on the Ayn Rand's Institute website, this old website, very old, in 2009, where I read about actual rational points why Israel has the right to exist, the right to defend itself, and why a Western man should support Israel and not support Arabs or Palestinians or terrorists. I mean, up to 2009, I didn't even consider on a rational level that terrorism is something bad, because you are not taught such things in school or in university. So you can imagine why so many people today support Palestinian cause, cheer Hamas, cheer other terrorists, call them resistance. This is all the result of either lack of proper education, proper thinking, to properly educate the young people to think, or just outright propaganda on public universities. And I can only imagine that it is much worse today than it was 25 years ago when I was at university. And my professor was critical of Israel for no good reason, actually. So the year 2009 was the year when I started looking at Israel as a normal country in abnormal circumstances, as a heroic country, Israelis as heroic people, not some devils or some wicked invaders, wicked oppressors, wicked occupiers, but just people who want to live but are forced into abnormal circumstances by their neighbors, by the whole Arab culture and death worship of Palestinians, because Palestinians are actually worse than other Arabs, as you can clearly see. That other Arabs hate Palestinians because Palestinians are something worse. They are the worst of the worst when it came to culture, to their outlook. Talking about Weltanschauung, so Weltanschauung of Palestinians is just pure death and destruction. There is nothing positive in Palestinian Weltanschauung. And the Palestinian problem will never go away until each and every single Palestinian has his Weltanschauung completely changed. And it can only be done through the process of denazification. This is something which has to be done. Just like Germans after World War II were denazified, to some extent it was done successfully because West Germany became a successful, liberal and peaceful country. And the same has to be done with Palestinians, but in order to do that, Israel has to completely defeat them, which was not the case in the last war in Gaza. So I think Israel will encounter the Palestinian problem again in a few years. But anyway, starting in 2009, I became very much interested in Ayn Rand's philosophy. I became an admirer of Israel instead of being skeptical of it or, like most libertarians, critical of it. So I changed completely. I completely changed my outlook on foreign policy. So, the libertarian tropes of United States being this evil empire, warmongering empire, which simply seeks armed conflicts all around the world and instigates armed conflicts, it came away, not at once, but quite quickly. I mean, I think around 2011, when I started my own series of podcasts, libertarian podcasts, free market podcasts, called Radio Żelaza, Radio Iron, I was already mostly objectivist, especially in foreign policy stuff. Although I still wanted to, I still was ideally anarcho-capitalist. That is, I still believed that we can at some point get rid of the state. Although eventually even this notion had to go because it was not consistent with proper outlook on what real freedom is. But this is not something I want to go into in this already too long video. But I can say for sure that starting in 2009 and perhaps crystallizing around 2011, 2012, I was definitely a Zionist, admirer of Israel, just like Nikos Sotirakopoulos is. I was not an anarcho-capitalist. I was definitely a radical free marketer, but I believed that proper institutions of objective law are necessary to guarantee our freedoms, that is, to guarantee our rights, our individual rights. I considered Ayn Rand's philosophy to be probably the best thing, best thing to believe in, best thing to consider one's philosophy for guiding his life. I was obviously non-Christian, but I still have this neopagan aesthetics, and I think this is the only thing which still connects me to my neopagan past as a teenager. That is the appreciation of this kind of glorious epic aesthetics of sculptures like Arno Breker or Polish neopagan sculptor Stanisław Szukalski. This kind of dynamism, epicness, and this kind of gloriousness. I am lost for words when it comes to describing these kind of indescribable feelings. So to reiterate my journey, so starting as a teenager, as a person interested in pre-Christian past, in pre-Christian traditions and pagan belief systems, I got into far-right ideology, which basically rejected everything about modern world, especially individualism and liberalism. But thanks to not losing my mind and still having the ability to think rationally and having the luck to be studying economics, I discovered free market economics or economics as a science, which has the appreciation for market exchange, for price calculation, which necessarily is at odds with this kind of neo-pagan rejection of merchant values. So all of this resulted in me, first of all, rejecting all kinds of economic statism or economic control. This is everything which characterizes far-right ideologies in economic matters had to be rejected on the grounds of proper economics. And when you reject economic collectivism, it does not necessarily follow to reject every other collectivism, but in my case, it worked. Although I can say that there are many people who are economically liberal, but are still far-right collectivists in other matters, and are still anti-Semitic, even though they can quote Milton Friedman or Ludwig von Mises, they still hate Jews. So it doesn't always happen like it happened with me. Perhaps because I am a unique and incredible individual. But anyway, I think that my early desire to delve into this kind of glorious aesthetics made me want to actually improve and develop my own thinking. So perhaps because I didn't want to abandon civilization and regress into literal pagan past, it was easy for me to accept markets and capitalism as necessary driving forces of civilization, the necessary forces to actually drive humanity into better state, while economic collectivism simply results in stagnation and misery. And perhaps because I remember Poland as a communist country in the 1980s, I could not accept any notion of economic collectivism, of state-owned heavy industry, for example. I mean, even as a teenager, I remember that I was very much in favor of privatization. I mean, even in my family, we always considered private property to be better than state-owned enterprises. So there are some things which are not actually the results of your own deep diving and pondering, but they were instilled into you in your youth. But of course, there are stuff which were instilled into you by your family, and you then rebelled against them, like my Catholicism, because I remember that my grandma was very Catholic. I mean, she was a fanatic Catholic, and I rebelled against it. But still, there were elements which now, as I'm talking, I'm thinking about it, that probably inoculated me against accepting hardcore economic collectivism, which is part and parcel of far-right ideologies, especially the neopagan ones. Because, as I said earlier, the neopagan worldview is based on the notion that national community owns all of the economy, all of the means of production are owned by the national community somehow. So the means of production remain in the hands of our people and are not speculated upon, are not sold to foreigners, and are not destroyed by financial interests. This is what those people believe in. So they reject economics totally. So maybe to summarize, because I don't know, my case is very unique. I can see that most people, just as I mentioned, most people who are, for instance, involved in far-right politics in Poland is unique in this regard also, because in Poland, far-right parties, that is the Confederation, and the second confederation, because there are already two confederations, they are quite free market. This is a unique position in European politics, that in Poland, far right is much more economically liberal than in other European countries, and currently even much more economically liberal than in America. But even though most of those people who are involved in the party Confederation and the party Confederation of Grzegorz Braun and, the two far-right parties, even though they seem to be more economically liberal than the rest of the political scene, they hate the liberal social order, they hate liberal institutions, they hate the rule of law, although in Poland, rule of law is kind of faulty anyway, but they hate European Union, even though European Union is mostly a pro-market institution. It is much over-regulated, of course, but when it comes, for instance, to the single market, it is probably the most pro-market institution one can think of. European Union is a one big free trade zone. But those people on the far right, they are against that. For instance, they were against Ukrainian wheat coming into European Union because Ukrainian wheat was cheaper than the Polish wheat grown in Poland, and the Ukrainian wheat coming into European Union was unfair competition against Polish wheat from Polish farmers. So as you can see, economic liberty is only accepted by them when it doesn't harm their own interests or the interests of their electorate, the interests of Polish farmers. So again, national community. Yeah, so foreign competition from foreign nation, Ukrainians, is considered evil. Ukrainians are considered evil. I mean, the Polish far right hates Ukrainians, which is very strange. They love Russia, but hate Ukrainians. So, as you can see, it's all the same as it was 25 years ago. Far right is full of irrational instincts, and there's nothing positive about their thinking. They basically hate everything which makes our life good. That's the main problem. Even though even in the neopagan worldview, life is considered a positive value. Only a life subjected to collective, subjected to the tribe, is considered worth living, while individual lives are worthless. And this is what far right today also believes. So a Ukrainian coming to Poland to live his life as an individual, to live a better life in Poland than he is capable in Ukraine, that's a no-no. Because according to the far right, Ukrainian only has the right to serve his own community back in the East, and he doesn't belong here, because here only ethnic Poles can live and prosper as a collective, but definitely not as a group of individuals, because individual cannot pursue his own life if it's against, the rules, the collective rules of the Polish nation. I mean, I can't even think in these terms like those people do. I've been an individualist for such a long time, for 22 years. I consider myself a libertarian individualist with this neo-pagan, non-Christian outlook on aesthetics. But I can see that regardless whether you are a Christian or a non-Christian far-righter, you basically believe in the same dystopia, anti-individualistic and anti-liberal dystopia. You can pay sometimes lip service to economic liberalism, but economic liberalism without liberal social institutions is meaningless. So never, ever believe the far-righters. Never believe people like Korwin-Mikke, like Grzegorz Braun. Those people do not have the interests of individuals as their goal. They look at us as mere means to an end. And, considering the modern far right in Poland, this end, what they seek, what they are striving for, is basically this kind of ultra-Catholic dictatorship under the protection of Russia, probably. with no Jews and no Ukrainians, no Germans, just this one uniform blob of a collectivized, Catholicized, imagined nation of true Poles. That's the thing. They obviously consider everyone who is not on their agenda a traitor and not a true Pole. But anyway, I think I was rambling for far too long. So, ending words: praise individuals, praise reason, and praise Israel. Tel Hai.